Take your hands off the girl. The words cut through the low hum of the roadside diner so sharply that even the old jukebox near the bathrooms seemed to fall silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Coffee cups stopped clinking against ceramic saucers. Outside, cold November rain streaked across the neon windows in crooked silver lines while 18-wheelers groaned down Highway 85 like distant thunder. Officer Travis Reed slowly turned around, one thick hand still gripping the wrist of the young waitress beside the register. "You got something you want to say?" he asked, his voice calm in the dangerous way that made people stop breathing before trouble started. The man who had spoken stood beside booth 7 near the fogged-up front window. He was older, maybe 60, tall but lean beneath a dark wool coat damp from the rain outside. His silver-gray beard was trimmed neatly, and a pair of cracked reading glasses rested low on his nose. Nothing about him looked threatening. In fact, he looked like the kind of man most people forgot 5 seconds after passing him on the street. "I said she doesn't deserve to be treated like that," the man replied quietly. The waitress, Sofia Ramirez, lowered her eyes immediately. She couldn't have been older than 22. Her hands trembled around the coffee pot she still held against her apron. Travis let out a short laugh and glanced toward his partner near the counter. Officer Kyle Bennett smirked without saying a word. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" Travis asked. The man reached calmly for his wallet. "Nathaniel Brooks." Travis didn't even look at the ID before slapping it back against the old man's chest. "You interfering with police business now, Nathaniel?" The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing the room in pale white shadows. Somewhere in the kitchen, grease crackled softly on the grill, but nobody moved. Nobody wanted to become part of whatever this was turning into. Nathaniel glanced once toward Sophia. Her eyes were glassy now, embarrassed more than afraid. "I'm simply asking you to let her go," he said. "You're hurting her wrist." Travis finally released the waitress, but the look on his face only darkened. He stepped closer until his badge nearly brushed Nathaniel's coat. "You know what your problem is?" Travis muttered. "Men like you think respect is automatic." Nathaniel's expression never changed. Rainwater dripped slowly from the brim of his coat onto the black and white tile floor between them. "No," he answered softly. "I think respect is earned by how you treat people when nobody's watching." The sentence landed heavier than anyone expected. Kyle shifted awkwardly near the register. One trucker near the pie station quietly pulled out his phone beneath the table. Travis noticed. His jaw tightened instantly. "That's enough," he snapped. "Turn around." A stunned silence swept through the diner as Travis pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Sophia gasped softly. "Officer, please," she whispered. He didn't do anything. Travis ignored her completely. Nathaniel looked down at the steel cuffs for a long moment before slowly placing both hands behind his back without resistance. The click of metal echoed through the diner like a gunshot in a church. And for the first time that night, something flickered in Nathaniel Brooks' eyes. Not fear, not anger, disappointment. The rain had eased into a cold mist by the time the patrol car pulled away from the diner parking lot. Water shimmered beneath the streetlights in long golden streaks, while the windshield wipers dragged back and forth with a dull rhythmic squeak. Nathaniel Brooks sat quietly in the back seat with his cuffed hands resting loosely in his lap. He did not complain about the cramped space. He did not ask questions. He only stared through the fogged glass at the passing glow of gas stations and half-empty motels sliding by in the dark Carolina night. Up front, Officer Kyle Bennett shifted uneasily in the passenger seat. "You really think this guy was worth all that?" he asked under his breath. Travis kept his eyes on the road. The second people stop fearing authority, everything falls apart. Kyle glanced toward the rearview mirror. Nathaniel remained perfectly still, his calm somehow making the silence heavier. "Still," Kyle muttered. He did not exactly do anything. Travis tightened both hands around the steering wheel. "You saw the way he looked at me." Kyle frowned slightly. "Looked at you how?" Travis did not answer right away. Outside, a freight train rumbled across distant tracks, its horn echoing through the wet night air. Finally, he said, "Like he thought he was better than me." Nathaniel lowered his eyes for the first time. The faint reflection of passing headlights moved across his cracked glasses like pale waves across dark water. "Respectfully," he said quietly from the back seat, "I never said that." Travis gave a dry laugh. "No, men like you never have to say it." The patrol car turned into the county processing lot 20 minutes later. Fluorescent lights glowed harshly above the concrete entrance while tired deputies shuffled paperwork behind thick security glass. The entire building smelled faintly of coffee, bleach, and wet jackets drying in overheated rooms. Nathaniel stepped out carefully once the door opened. At 6'2", he still carried himself with quiet dignity despite the steel around his wrists. A young deputy approached with a clipboard in hand. "Name?" he asked without looking up. "Nathaniel Brooks." The deputy paused mid-writing. "You got identification on him?" Travis handed over the wallet carelessly. The deputy flipped it open. His expression changed instantly, just for half a second. But Nathaniel noticed. Travis noticed too. "Problem?" Travis asked sharply. "No, sir." The deputy replied too quickly, closing the wallet again. Nathaniel watched the nervous flicker in the young man's face, but said nothing. He could feel the temperature dropping inside the holding area. Somewhere nearby, an old ventilation fan rattled against metal ductwork with a tired mechanical hum. Sophia's frightened expression still lingered in his mind. The trembling coffee pot, the embarrassment in her eyes when customers stared. That part hurt him more than the handcuffs ever could. A few minutes later, the deputy returned carrying paperwork for the intake report. "Charges?" he asked. Travis barely looked up from his phone. "Interference. Disorderly conduct." Nathaniel slowly lifted his gaze. "Officer Reed," he said, softly, "you still have time to reconsider this." Travis slipped the phone back into his pocket and stepped closer. "You threatening me now?" "No," Nathaniel answered. "I am giving you the chance to make a better decision." The fluorescent light above them buzzed loudly for a moment before flickering once. Kyle rubbed the back of his neck and looked away. Something about the older man's voice unsettled him. Not because it sounded angry, because it sounded disappointed in a way that reached deeper than anger ever could. Then the holding room door opened again, and a gray-haired clerk hurried inside, carrying tomorrow morning's court docket. The gray-haired court clerk stopped abruptly the moment he saw Nathaniel standing beneath the flickering intake lights. A thick folder slipped slightly from his hands before he tightened his grip again. Rainwater still glistened on Nathaniel's dark coat, while the steel cuffs reflected cold silver beneath the fluorescent ceiling panels. For a brief second, nobody spoke. The humming ventilation fan overhead suddenly sounded louder than before. "Everything all right, Frank?" Travis asked, irritation creeping into his voice. The clerk swallowed quickly and forced a nod. "Yes, sir. Just tomorrow morning's docket." He stepped carefully toward the intake counter and placed the folder down beside the deputy's keyboard. Nathaniel lowered his eyes quietly, pretending not to notice the nervous tension spreading across the room. Kyle Bennett noticed it anyway. He watched Frank avoid looking directly at Nathaniel, watched the young deputy suddenly become very interested in organizing paperwork that was already stacked neatly. Something felt wrong now. Not dangerous. Worse. Embarrassing. Travis, however, seemed blind to all of it. He leaned one elbow against the counter and signed the arrest forms with sharp, impatient strokes. "Process him," he muttered. "I do not want to spend all night babysitting." Nathaniel finally spoke again, his voice calm and steady despite the cold air creeping through the concrete building. "Officer Reed, may I ask you something?" Travis sighed heavily. "What now? Why did my speaking upset you more than my actions?" Kyle looked up immediately at the question. Travis gave a short laugh that carried no humor. "Because men like you always think you are smarter than everybody else." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. "And if I am educated?" Travis stepped forward. "That is not the point." "Then what is?" The silence afterward stretched long enough to make Kyle uncomfortable. Even the deputy behind the desk stopped typing. Travis opened his mouth once, then closed it again. Nathaniel never raised his voice, never challenged him physically. Somehow that made the tension worse. Finally, Travis grabbed the intake clipboard and shoved it toward the deputy. "Finish this." He turned toward the coffee machine near the hallway, muttering under his breath. Kyle remained near the counter while Nathaniel stood quietly beside the holding room door. Up close, the older man looked exhausted rather than angry. Tiny lines rested beneath his eyes like cracks worn by years of carrying heavy things without complaint. "You could have told him," Kyle said quietly after a moment. Nathaniel looked over. "Told him what?" Kyle hesitated. Whatever made everybody in this room suddenly nervous. Nathaniel's expression softened slightly behind the cracked lenses. And would that have changed his decision? Kyle glanced toward Travis pouring stale coffee into a paper cup across the room. Maybe. Nathaniel gave a slow shake of his head. Then he would only be respecting a title, not a person. The words settled heavily inside Kyle's chest. Before he could answer, Frank hurried back toward the counter carrying additional forms. He leaned close to the deputy and whispered something so quietly it almost disappeared beneath the buzz of the overhead lights. But Kyle caught enough. Tomorrow morning, courtroom 3. The deputy's eyes widened instantly. Travis returned with his coffee just as Frank straightened again. "What is everybody whispering about?" he asked sharply. Nobody answered fast enough. Travis narrowed his eyes suspiciously before taking a sip from the cup. At that exact moment, the deputy accidentally turned the intake monitor slightly too far toward the room. The glowing blue screen reflected in Nathaniel's glasses for half a second before Travis noticed the bold black letters near the top of the profile page. Honorable Nathaniel Brooks. Travis slowly lowered the coffee cup from his mouth. The room went completely silent. Travis stared at the glowing monitor as though the words might rearrange themselves into something less dangerous. Honorable Nathaniel Brooks remained fixed across the blue intake screen beside an official county seal and a courthouse identification number that suddenly made the air inside the station feel thin. The paper coffee cup slipped slightly in Travis's hand before he tightened his grip again. Nobody moved. Nobody even pretended to work anymore. The young deputy behind the counter looked pale beneath the fluorescent lights while Frank quietly removed his glasses and rubbed a trembling hand across his forehead. Nathaniel stood exactly where he had been the entire time, shoulders relaxed, rainwater still darkening the fabric of his coat. He did not smirk. He did not lecture anyone. Somehow that made everything worse. Kyle Bennett broke the silence first. "Judge Brooks." His voice came out smaller than intended. Nathaniel turned toward him with calm, tired eyes. "Good evening, Officer Bennett." Travis finally stepped closer to the monitor. "This is some kind of mistake." Frank swallowed hard. "It is not a mistake." Travis looked back toward Nathaniel. "You are a judge?" Nathaniel gave a slow nod. "District Court. 12 years. The room seemed to shrink around Travis after those words. He replayed the entire night in fragments flashing across his mind like broken headlights on wet pavement. The diner, the handcuffs, Sophia begging him to stop, the old man warning him quietly to reconsider. Travis suddenly remembered the way Nathaniel had carried himself from the beginning. Not fearful, not arrogant, certain. The certainty of someone who had spent years watching people reveal themselves under pressure. "Why did you not say anything?" Travis asked sharply, though now the anger sounded thinner, weaker. Nathaniel looked directly at him. "Would you have listened?" The question landed harder than any accusation. Kyle lowered his eyes immediately. Even Frank stopped breathing for a second. Travis opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because they all knew the answer already. Nathaniel slowly glanced toward the cuffs still around his wrists. Titles should not determine whether a person deserves dignity. His voice remained quiet. "That was the point you missed tonight." Outside the station windows, distant thunder rolled across the dark South Carolina sky, while rain tapped softly against the glass in uneven rhythms. Somewhere deeper in the building, an old phone rang twice before stopping abruptly. Travis rubbed one hand across his jaw. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain inside his own uniform. "Judge Brooks." Nathaniel gently interrupted him. "You believe power gave you permission to decide who mattered before knowing anything about them." Travis looked away. The fluorescent light overhead flickered once, briefly casting shadows across the holding area. Kyle stepped closer to Nathaniel now, visibly uncomfortable. "Sir, we can release you immediately. We can clear all this paperwork." Nathaniel's eyes shifted toward him kindly. "I know you can." Kyle hesitated. "Then, what would you like us to do?" Nathaniel looked toward the intake counter where the unsigned arrest report still rested beside the keyboard. "Finish the process exactly as you would for anyone else." Travis frowned. "After what happened, you still want this documented?" Nathaniel slowly straightened his coat despite the cuffs restricting his hands. "Especially after what happened." Silence settled over the room again, heavier this time. Not tense anymore. Ashamed. Frank quietly removed the docket folder from beneath his arm and glanced toward tomorrow morning's schedule. Courtroom 3, 8:30 sharp. Travis Reed listed as responding officer in a misconduct review hearing connected to an unrelated civilian complaint. And presiding over that courtroom tomorrow morning would be Judge Nathaniel Brooks. The holding cell door closed with a heavy metallic click that echoed through the concrete hallway long after the deputy walked away. Nathaniel Brooks sat alone on the narrow steel bench. Beneath a pale fluorescent light that buzzed softly overhead like an exhausted insect trapped in glass. The room smelled faintly of bleach, cold cement, and old rainwater carried in on damp shoes. Somewhere farther down the corridor, another detainee coughed into the silence before everything went still again. Nathaniel loosened his shoulders slowly and removed his cracked glasses with careful hands. One lens had been scratched years earlier during a courthouse flood evacuation when a frightened child collided with him on the stairwell. He had never bothered replacing them. The scratch reminded him that even difficult days eventually passed. He rubbed the bridge of his nose quietly and leaned back against the wall. Outside the narrow, reinforced window near the ceiling, rain continued falling across the city in soft silver sheets beneath the streetlights. At the front desk, Travis Reed stood alone beside the intake counter staring at the arrest report like it belonged to somebody else. His untouched coffee had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. Kyle Bennett leaned against a nearby filing cabinet with folded arms. "You should let him go," Kyle said carefully. Travis did not look up. "And admit I made a mistake?" "You did make a mistake." Travis slammed the report down harder than intended. "You think I do not know that?" The sound bounced sharply through the quiet station. A dispatcher in the next room glanced toward them before quickly looking away again. Kyle lowered his voice. "Then fix it before tomorrow morning." Travis laughed bitterly under his breath. "Tomorrow morning?" He rubbed both hands across his face. "By tomorrow morning, half the courthouse will know what happened tonight." Kyle hesitated before speaking again. "Maybe that is not the worst part." Travis slowly lifted his eyes. "What is that supposed to mean?" Kyle looked toward the hallway leading to the holding cells. "The worst part is that he treated you with more respect tonight than you treated him." The sentence hung between them like smoke after a fire. Travis stared at Kyle for several seconds without speaking. Then he looked away first. Deep down, he knew the younger officer was right. That was the part clawing at him now. Not fear for his career. Shame. Real shame. It settled into his chest heavier than the duty belt around his waist. Across the station, Frank quietly gathered tomorrow's court files into neat stacks beneath the yellow glow of an old desk lamp. He had worked county courts for 31 years. He had seen angry judges, arrogant judges, impatient judges. Nathaniel Brooks had never been any of those things. That was why tonight disturbed him so deeply. Frank remembered the first time Nathaniel took the bench 12 years ago. Half the courthouse underestimated him before he even spoke. By lunchtime, every person inside that courtroom had realized the same thing. Nathaniel Brooks did not command respect by demanding it. He earned it by giving it away first. Back inside the holding cell, Nathaniel folded his hands together and closed his eyes briefly. He thought about Sophia standing behind the diner counter, trying not to cry in front of strangers. He thought about Kyle's uneasy silence in the patrol car. And he thought about Travis Reed, a man so desperate to feel authority that he no longer recognized dignity when it stood directly in front of him. Footsteps finally approached down the hallway. Slow. Hesitant. Nathaniel opened his eyes as Travis appeared outside the bars holding a ring of keys in one hand. The officer looked exhausted now, older somehow beneath the harsh station lights. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Travis cleared his throat quietly and said, "Judge Brooks, I do not think I know how to fix what happened tonight." The hallway lights dimmed automatically after midnight, washing the station in a tired amber glow that softened the sharp edges of concrete walls and steel doors. Rain still whispered against the narrow windows high above the holding cells, slower now, gentler, like the storm itself had grown exhausted. Nathaniel Brooks remained seated on the steel bench with his hands folded loosely in front of him, while Travis Reed stood outside the bars holding the keys that could end the entire night with one simple turn. But neither man moved. Travis looked different now, smaller somehow beneath the weight of silence pressing down around them. His uniform was still crisp, his badge still polished. Yet the confidence that once filled every movement had drained away somewhere between the diner and this cold hallway. "I do not think I know how to fix what happened tonight," Travis repeated quietly. Nathaniel studied him for a long moment before speaking. Most people think accountability begins with punishment. His calm voice blended with the soft hum of distant fluorescent lights. It begins with honesty. Travis looked down at the floor. The keys trembled faintly in his hand. You think I am racist? Nathaniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the rain-streaked window at the end of the corridor, where pale reflections shimmered across the wet glass. I think, he said softly, you stopped seeing people before you started policing them. The words settled heavily into the quiet. Somewhere in the front office, an old printer suddenly whirred to life before falling silent again. Travis leaned back against the bars and rubbed one tired hand across his face. My father wore this badge 30 years, he muttered. He taught me people either respected authority or challenged it. Nathaniel nodded slowly. And which one was I doing tonight? Travis opened his mouth, then stopped. Because deep down he knew the truth already. Nathaniel had never challenged him. Not once. He had only defended someone weaker than himself. That realization sat inside Travis's chest like cold iron. I saw your coat, your old car outside. The diner waitress looking scared, Travis admitted quietly. I thought I knew exactly who you were. Nathaniel gave the faintest smile, though sadness rested behind it. That is the danger of assumptions. They make us blind before we even open our eyes. For several seconds, only the sound of rain filled the hallway. Then Nathaniel slowly removed his cracked glasses and held them carefully in his hands. Do you know why I still wear these? Travis frowned slightly. Nathaniel traced one finger along the scratched lens. My wife bought them for me 20 years ago when I became assistant district attorney. During a courthouse evacuation, a frightened little boy crashed into me on the stairs and cracked the lens. He looked up gently. I kept them because every time I wear them, I remember fear makes people react before they think. Travis swallowed hard. The station suddenly felt unbearably quiet. And tonight, he asked softly. Nathaniel's eyes rested on him steadily. Tonight, I saw a man afraid of losing control. The sentence cut deeper than anger ever could. Travis lowered his head completely now. For the first time in many years, he did not feel like an officer standing above someone else. He felt like a man staring directly at the worst version of himself. Nathaniel slowly stood from the bench despite the stiffness in his knees. The overhead light reflected softly against his silver hair. Officer Reed, he said quietly, real authority is not measured by how many people obey you. Travis looked up. Nathaniel's voice remained calm, almost fatherly now. It is measured by how many people feel safe when you walk into the room. The keys in Travis's hand stopped trembling. Then, without another word, he finally stepped forward toward the cell door. The cell door opened with a low metallic groan that echoed softly through the nearly empty station. Travis Reed stepped aside without speaking while Nathaniel Brooks walked out slowly, adjusting the sleeves of his damp coat beneath the amber hallway lights. The cuffs were gone now, but faint red marks still circled his wrists like quiet reminders of everything that had happened. Kyle Bennett stood near the front desk pretending to organize paperwork, though his eyes kept drifting toward Nathaniel with visible discomfort. Nobody knew exactly what to say anymore. The station no longer felt like a place of authority. It felt like a room full of people suddenly forced to look at themselves honestly for the first time. Nathaniel paused near the intake counter and picked up his cracked glasses from beside the arrest forms. The scratched lens caught the pale glow overhead as he slipped them back onto his face. Frank stepped forward, awkwardly holding the unsigned paperwork. Judge Brooks, he said carefully, we can destroy the report if you want. Nathaniel looked at the stack for a long moment. Then he shook his head gently. No, Travis frowned immediately. You really want this on record? Nathaniel's expression remained calm. The truth should not disappear simply because it becomes uncomfortable. The sentence settled heavily over the room. Outside the front windows, the storm had finally passed. Thin streams of rainwater still crawled down the glass, while the dark parking lot reflected scattered pools of yellow streetlight. Travis stared at Nathaniel quietly. You are going to destroy me in court tomorrow anyway. Nathaniel slowly turned toward him. If I wanted revenge, Officer Reed, I would have revealed who I was the moment you touched the handcuffs. Travis looked down instantly because he knew that was true. Nathaniel could have humiliated him publicly at the diner, could have threatened lawsuits, could have called the police chief before they even reached the station. Instead, he had remained silent and allowed the night to unfold naturally. That realization hurt more with every passing minute. Kyle finally spoke up from the counter. Why? Nathaniel glanced toward him. Why what? Kyle hesitated. Why stay quiet after everything? Nathaniel looked toward the holding cell hallway one last time before answering. Because too many people only behave correctly when they fear consequences. His voice remained soft. Character reveals itself when people believe there will be none. The station fell silent again. Frank slowly removed the arrest sheet from the clipboard and folded it neatly beneath the docket files for the morning hearing. Travis rubbed both hands across his tired face and let out a slow breath. I spent 15 years thinking authority meant control, he admitted quietly. Tonight was the first time somebody made me realize it should have meant responsibility. Nathaniel studied him carefully. The anger he might have carried earlier had faded completely now, replaced by something quieter, sadder. Then perhaps tonight was not a complete failure. Travis looked up in surprise. Nathaniel adjusted his coat collar before walking toward the exit doors. People can learn, he said. But only if they are willing to feel ashamed before they become defensive. The automatic doors slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. Cold, early morning air drifted inside, carrying the clean scent of wet pavement and pine trees after rain. Nathaniel stopped just outside beneath the station awning and looked toward the courthouse several blocks away, where faint lights still glowed against the dark sky. Travis followed him out slowly. Judge Brooks. Nathaniel turned slightly. Travis swallowed hard before speaking again. Tomorrow morning. How are you supposed to sit on that bench after what I did tonight? Nathaniel's tired eyes rested on him steadily beneath the courthouse lights reflecting in the distance. The same way I always have, he answered quietly. By remembering the law was created to protect people from power, not to protect power from people. Morning sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps in long pale bands of gold, reflecting softly against the marble columns that towered above the crowded entrance. Reporters moved near the sidewalks with coffee cups and folded newspapers tucked beneath their arms, while attorneys hurried through the revolving doors carrying leather briefcases and stacks of legal folders. Inside Courtroom 3, the low murmur of conversation drifted beneath the high vaulted ceiling like distant wind before a storm. Officer Travis Reed sat stiffly at the prosecution table in full uniform, though the badge on his chest suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image again and again. Nathaniel Brooks standing calmly beneath the diner lights while steel cuffs locked around his wrists. Across the courtroom, Kyle Bennett adjusted nervously in his seat near the witness stand. Even Frank looked unsettled while arranging paperwork at the clerk's desk. Then the side door opened quietly. The entire room stood at once. Nathaniel Brooks entered wearing a black judicial robe that moved softly around his shoulders with each measured step. Sunlight filtered through the tall courthouse windows, catching the silver in his hair as he approached the bench with calm steady dignity. No anger crossed his face. No bitterness. Yet the silence inside the courtroom deepened instantly the moment he sat down. Travis lowered his eyes. Be seated, Nathaniel said gently. His voice carried through the courtroom with effortless authority, calm enough to still every whisper in the room. The hearing began with routine motions connected to the civilian misconduct complaint already scheduled before the events of the previous night. A young construction worker sat nervously at the defense table claiming excessive force during a traffic stop weeks earlier involving Travis Reed. Nathaniel listened carefully to every word, occasionally adjusting his cracked glasses while sunlight reflected faintly across the scratched lens. Travis answered each question professionally, but his voice lacked the confidence it once carried. Nathaniel never embarrassed him, never hinted at the arrest from the night before. In fact, he treated Travis with more fairness than Travis had shown him at the diner. That realization slowly became unbearable. Halfway through testimony, Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. Officer Reed, he said calmly, do you believe authority gives law enforcement officers the right to make assumptions before gathering facts? The courtroom became still enough to hear papers shifting near the jury rail. Travis swallowed hard. He knew this question was larger than the case itself, larger than yesterday. No, Your Honor, he answered quietly. Nathaniel studied him carefully for a long moment. And why is that important? Travis looked down at his own hands resting on the witness stand. For the first time in his career, he answered without hiding behind procedure or pride. Because once an officer stops seeing people clearly, he admitted softly, justice becomes personal instead of lawful. A faint murmur passed through the courtroom before fading again. Nathaniel nodded once, almost imperceptibly. That is correct. The hearing continued for another 40 minutes beneath the warm glow of morning sunlight crawling slowly across the polished courtroom floor. When it finally ended, Nathaniel issued a formal recommendation for additional departmental review and de-escalation retraining connected to the civilian complaint. Fair, professional, measured, no revenge, no humiliation, just accountability. As people began filing quietly toward the exits, Travis remained seated alone at the witness stand staring at the empty courtroom. Nathaniel gathered his papers slowly before stepping down from the bench. Near the side exit, Travis finally stood and spoke without lifting his eyes. You could have ruined me today. Nathaniel paused beside the courtroom doors. No, Officer Reed, he answered softly. You were already doing that to yourself long before we met. 3 weeks later, winter sunlight poured softly across the windows of the same roadside diner beside Highway 85, warming the faded red booths and silver napkin holders with a quiet golden glow. The lunch crowd moved lazily through the afternoon rush, while country music hummed low from the old jukebox near the bathrooms. Outside, 18-wheelers rolled past in steady waves beneath a pale Carolina sky, washed clean by last night's rain. Sofia Ramirez balanced a tray of coffee mugs carefully against her shoulder as she moved between tables, smiling more easily now than she had that night. Something about the diner felt lighter these days. Safer. The front door opened with a soft bell chime overhead, and conversations near the counter briefly faded. Nathaniel Brooks stepped inside wearing the same dark wool coat and cracked glasses, though this time there were no flashing patrol lights outside. No fear hanging in the air. Only the smell of fresh coffee and warm pecan pie drifting through the room. Sophia's face brightened instantly. Judge Brooks, she said warmly. Nathaniel smiled gently. Good afternoon, Sophia. She guided him toward booth 7 beside the fogged front window where sunlight stretched across the tabletop in long pale rectangles. Your usual? She asked. Nathaniel nodded once. And 1 slice of pecan pie. Sophia laughed softly. I already told the kitchen. Nathaniel settled slowly into the booth, setting his glasses carefully beside the napkin holder while trucks murmured past outside like distant thunder rolling across open land. For the first time in weeks, the deep lines around his eyes seemed softer. Rested. Across the diner, the front bell chimed again. Nathaniel glanced up quietly as Officer Kyle Bennett stepped inside, wearing plain clothes instead of a uniform. Kyle looked nervous, standing there without the shield of the badge on his chest. He spotted Nathaniel immediately and hesitated before approaching the booth. Mind if I sit?